All right, welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're heading down south to Odessa, Texas, back in 1981, December 1981. We're going to dig into a case that really shook the community.
It's a case, full of twists and turns, and it's really going to make you think about, the justice system and how it can go wrong sometimes.
Exactly. So we're talking about the murder of Father Patrick Ryan and the subsequent conviction of James Harry Ryos.
Mm.
Uh, from a confession under the influence to a prosecutor who later fights for the convicted man's innocence, we've got destroyed evidence.
Yeah, and the impact of societal biases. This case has it all.
So picture this.
Mm.
The Sand and Sage Motel, December 1981. A housekeeper walks into a room and finds Father Ryan's body. And it's a brutal scene.
Absolutely. The room was just trashed, completely in disarray. I mean, the level of just destruction there suggests something much more than a robbery, right? Like a personal rage, something deeper going on.
And get this, no one seems to have heard or seen anything.
Yeah. Isn't that strange?
It's a motel.
You'd think with all that commotion.
Right, exactly. Like, especially in a motel.
Yeah.
You think someone would have heard something, seen something. The neighbor in the next room even claimed to have heard nothing.
Which seems almost impossible given the violence of the attack. I mean, makes you wonder if the initial investigation, if they really looked into all the potential witnesses, talked to all the guests.
Yeah, there are always those questions that linger, right?
Yeah.
Like what could have been missed in those initial crucial days? So 5 days pass. The police finally identify their John Doe. It's Father Patrick Ryan. He was a Catholic priest, had been reported missing. And that's where James Harry Ryos comes into the story.
Right. Harry was a young man, new to the area. He had just moved to Denver City, and he had actually met Father Ryan a few weeks before the murder.
Yeah. And they had a pretty unique connection. They met while Harry was hitchhiking.
And, they spent some time together, drinking, talking. Harry even left some of his things at the rectory where Father Ryan lived.
And this is where things get really, really murky. Harry actually claimed that Father Ryan had sexually assaulted him.
Yeah, and that adds a whole other layer, a possible motive.
Exactly. It brings in that power dynamic, right? You have a young man, new in town, struggling with some things, maybe not in the best place in his life. And then you have this respected figure in the community, Father Ryan. And that context is crucial when we consider what happens next.
Yeah, for sure.
So the police, of course, they question Harry extensively. But he had what seemed like a pretty solid alibi for the night of the murder. Receipts, a speeding ticket hundreds of miles away in Roswell, New Mexico. Plus, he passed a polygraph test. And there was no physical evidence at the crime scene linking him to the murder.
So it seems like an open and shut case, right? But a year later, things take a completely unexpected turn.
It's like a bombshell. Harry calls 911, and he confesses to the murder. Says he's the killer.
It's a complete shock.
Totally out of the blue.
Yeah. But almost as quickly as he confesses, he takes it back.
Retracts the whole thing.
Says, I was drunk. I was high. I just wanted to stir up some trouble. Insists he had nothing to do with Father Ryan's death. Claims his confession was driven by guilt, for asking the priest for a ride that day.
So what do you make of that?
It's a big question, right?
Yeah.
Was it a true confession clouded by substances? Or was it, like he said, just a cry for help from a young man dealing with some heavy stuff? I mean, this is where the whole idea of false confessions really comes into play.
Exactly. And it becomes a central question that pretty much decides Harry's fate.
Absolutely.
Despite having no physical evidence and a pretty solid alibi, the prosecution decides to focus on that confession. They portray Harry as this troubled young man with a past, alcohol abuse, someone capable of violence.
And the defense, of course, they fight back. They argue the confession, it was coerced, unreliable, it was just, a product of Harry's state of mind.
So you have this really complicated legal battle. On one hand, you have a confession, even though it was recanted. On the other hand, you have no physical evidence and this seemingly strong alibi.
Talk about a tough case for a jury.
And in the end, they find Harry guilty.
Wow.
They sentence him to 38 years. But even that sentence is kind of strange, right? It's
Yeah.
actually pretty light for a murder conviction.
Yeah.
It makes you think, did some of those jurors have doubts?
It definitely raises questions. Did they truly believe he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or did, societal perceptions of Harry being a young, gay, indigenous man, did that play a role in their decision?
Yeah. And that's a question that hangs over this entire case.
Absolutely.
So years pass, and the prosecutor, Dennis Sadra, he starts to have second thoughts. He goes back, reviews the case files, the evidence, the timeline, and he comes to a pretty shocking conclusion.
And this is where Sadra's actions really stand out. I mean, he could have just ignored those doubts, right? Moved on. But instead, he decides to dig deeper to seek the truth, even if it meant challenging his own work, his own past decisions.
Yeah. What he does next is unheard of for a prosecutor. He writes this detailed letter to the governor of Texas asking for a pardon for Harry. He straight up says, "I believe I helped convict an innocent man."
It takes a lot of courage to admit you were wrong, especially in a situation like this. It really shows, his commitment to justice.
It's a powerful statement. But sadly, his efforts, they hit a wall. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, they deny Harry's petition. And he remains in prison, labeled murderer, even with all these growing doubts.
Which is just a reminder of how difficult it is to overturn a wrongful conviction, even when you have someone like the prosecutor fighting for you.
Yeah. And as if things couldn't get any more complicated, remember all that physical evidence we talked about?
Yeah.
Turns out the Odessa Police Department, they destroyed it all back
Yeah.
in 1994. Gone. No explanation.
It's really frustrating, especially with the technology we have now. Modern forensic techniques could potentially give us some answers. But without the evidence, it's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
Exactly. And to make things even more complex, there's another layer to this story. Another murdered priest, Father Benjamin Carrier. His case has these eerie similarities to Father Ryan's murder. And it raises the question, what if Harry was wrongly convicted for a crime someone else committed?
So let's fast forward a bit to November 1982. About a year after Harry's confession, we're in Yuma, Arizona now, and another priest, Father Benjamin Carrier, is found dead in his motel room, the El Rancho Motel.
Another priest found dead in a motel room. It's hard not to see the parallels, right?
It's definitely unsettling. I mean, like Father Ryan, Father Carrier was also found face down, bound, robbed, and his car was missing too.
Okay, so we've got two priests, both found dead in motels, both robbed. Seems like a clear pattern, right? But hold on, the Yuma police, they focused on two hitchhikers that were last seen with Father Carrier. So was this just a random act of violence? Or could there be a more, I don't know, a more sinister connection?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, Father Carrier was known for his compassion. He often helped people in need, picked up hitchhikers. So it's possible that the police, they just fixated on that angle and didn't really explore other possibilities.
But you gotta wonder, right, with Harry Ryos confessing to killing a priest in a similar way just a year earlier, shouldn't that have been like a red flag for the Yuma investigators?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But there's no evidence that they ever even considered Harry as a suspect in Father Carrier's case. It's like, did they not talk to each other? Did these different police departments not communicate?
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Especially knowing that the evidence in both cases was eventually destroyed.
It's incredibly frustrating.
But wait, there's more. There's this whole other piece to the puzzle that adds another layer of intrigue. There was this man in Idaho. He committed suicide, right? But get this. Before he did, he tried to confess to a priest's murder.
Yeah. It's a chilling detail, isn't it? And while it's all speculation, it does raise the possibility that there might have been, a serial killer targeting priests, someone preying on their kindness and their willingness to help others.
It's a terrifying thought. So we're left with these two cases, all these missed opportunities, and a whole lot of destroyed evidence. It's a story that really makes you question how our justice system actually works. How easily things can go wrong, and how someone might be convicted for something they didn't even do.
Exactly. And when you look at everything, I mean, the lack of physical evidence against Harry, his alibi, the prosecutor changing his mind, and then the similarities to Father Carrier's case, it all points to a very real possibility of a wrongful conviction.
It's a lot to unpack. So where do we even go from here? With such limited information, is there any way to uncover the truth? Like, what are the options? So we've gone through a lot. 2 murders, a questionable conviction, and then the fact that all the evidence is just gone.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, right? Like, what if the system got it wrong? What if an innocent man was punished for a crime he didn't commit?
That's the scary part. And, Harry's case, it's not unique. Wrongful convictions, they happen all the time.
More often than we'd like to think, right? And a lot of times, it's marginalized communities that are hit the hardest.
It's true. There's studies that show that Black people, for example, they're way more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder than white people. And this bias, it extends to other groups too, like indigenous people, LGBTQ plus folks, you name it.
It's a tough reality. These societal biases, they can creep into the courtroom, They can affect how investigations are done, how cases are prosecuted, and even how juries make their decisions. And in Harry's case, well, you have to wonder if being a gay Indigenous man played a role in his conviction, even though there wasn't any solid evidence.
Right. It's like, were they judging him for who he was, not for what he actually did?
It's a valid question. So how do we fix this? How do we prevent these wrongful convictions from happening? How do we make sure justice is really being served?
Yeah.
What can we do?
Well, there are organizations out there like the Innocence Project. They're doing amazing work. They're fighting to get people who were wrongly convicted out of prison.
I've heard of them. How do they do it?
They use all sorts of tools,
Yeah.
DNA testing, investigative research, legal advocacy. They really go the extra mile to try and overturn these unjust verdicts.
That's incredible. They deserve all the support they can get. But we need to do more than just react, right? We need to be proactive, stop these wrongful convictions from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. It starts with tackling those systemic biases
Mm-hmm.
in law enforcement, in the courts, everywhere.
Yeah.
And we need better interrogation techniques, to prevent false confessions. We need to make sure defense attorneys have the resources they need to really represent their clients effectively. And it's on all of us to be aware of this issue.
Right. If we don't know about it, we can't do anything to fix it. Exactly. We need to understand the problem. Why do these wrongful convictions happen? Things like false confessions, eyewitness misidentification, inadequate legal representation, these are all factors.
It's like the more we know, the more we can demand change and hold this system accountable. So let's bring it back to Harry. He was released on parole back in 2003, but he still has this murder conviction on his record.
Hmm.
Is there any way for him to clear his name completely? I mean, especially with all the evidence being gone.
It's going to be an uphill battle for sure. Losing that evidence, it's a huge setback. But it's not necessarily impossible. Forensic science is always advancing. There might be new techniques out there that could, pull DNA from trace evidence that we couldn't use before.
So there's still a chance, even in a case like this.
There's always hope. Maybe they can re-examine witness statements, look at different theories, really push for the case to be reviewed, maybe even try to get a posthumous pardon if new evidence comes to light. It's a long shot, but you never know.
Yeah, you never know. Well, this deep dive, it's been a wild ride. We've uncovered a lot of twists and turns, but I think we're ending up with more questions than answers.
That seems to happen a lot with these cases. It's rarely simple.
But maybe that's the point, right? Justice is complicated. Finding the truth takes time and effort. And sometimes it's a fight that never really ends.
It's a fight worth fighting. We can't just sit back and let these injustices happen. We have to keep demanding more from our justice system. We have to keep fighting for those who have been wrongly accused and wrongly convicted. Harry's story, it shows us just how easily the system can fail. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in making it better. We need to push for reform, make sure that everyone, no matter who they are, has a fair chance to prove your innocence.
It's a powerful message. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We hope this got you thinking, made you curious, and helped you understand just how complex the justice system can be.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and most importantly, keep fighting for a more just world.
We'll see you next time.